nothing in the world actually exists. Your mind is creating the illusion of existing things. Let me explain exactly what this means. So, when we think of something that exists, we think of something that is real. And something that is real, we have to understand this context. Something real fundamentally is. It means that despite what anybody else thinks, feels, doesn't think or feel, despite if there was any mind at all, anyone to see it, hear it, touch it, feel it, taste it, it would still be. It's fundamental, something fundamentally real that nobody can deny. That's what we refer to when we talk about existence. So if we were to talk about a relative version of this, imagine a wave in the ocean. It doesn't really exist. Why? Because it's the water that exists and not the wave. If we think of a wooden fence, it's not the fence that exists, it's the wood. So everything that we're seeing seems to have an existence, but it doesn't have an existence. The thing it's made of has the existence. Now, we're talking about this on a grander scale of like reality. So when we say something exists, namely the essence of an object, we're saying that it stands apart from or stands out from and is fundamentally real in its own right. So in other words, the water is fundamentally real in its own right. For it to be fundamentally real in its own right, it must have its own standalone reality. In other words, water must be something that exists independently of everything else. So if everything else was capable of disappearing and blipping out of existence, water would still be there. This is something that we get very confused about. Anything that has a relative existence, meaning that it starts and stops, comes and goes, borrows its reality from something else. So nothing that exists as a limited, finite object has its own infinite existence. Why? Because something that starts and stops, comes and goes is temporary. Nothing temporary can have its own infinite standalone existence. So therefore, it can't be fundamentally real. So the thing we're here to see is that our mind is what is creating and sustaining the greater reality of the things that appear to be real. So the things that we look at, we look around the world, we say, yes, it exists. It exists. Look, the table and the chair is there. I see it is there. You can't tell me it's not there. Yes, I agree with you. There is an appearance of something real. But is the thing that we're seeing that is real, the realness of it, is it really coming from the object? Or is it coming from the reality that is creating the reality of the appearance of the chair? So this is the question that we're asking here. What I'm sharing is that the thing that we see that is real when we look at the reality of an object doesn't come from the object. It comes from the reality that's creating it. So if you talk about a game analogy, if I'm in a simulated reality and I see that the tree in the virtual reality headset looks real, the reality isn't coming from the tree if I'm in a virtual reality, right? It's not coming from there's no tree there to have a reality. There is something real, but the reality isn't tree. The reality is whatever program created the system, the ones and zeros, right? In this instance, I'm not familiar that much with that technology, but you understand the sentiment here. The game is what's real, not the tree. So the tree borrows its reality from the reality of the game. In this reality, we think the trees, the objects, have their own independent existence. In other words, they stand out apart from our reality, have their own reality, and it's a different reality from the one we're experiencing. I'm saying, no, that is not what's happening. We are creating the reality of the things that appear to be real. How do we see this in our direct experience? This is something that, like, this isn't the fleeting ideas that this 27-year-old has just come upon. These have been going on for centuries. This is not new understanding that I'm sharing here. This is ancient understanding. Time and space are relative. They're relative to objects. Without objects, no time and space. This is basic science. So what we're yet to understand, what we're yet to see, is that the reality of these objects do not come from the objects. This is why science goes around in circles. They want to find a substance inside the object that creates the reality of the object. And what do they find when they look close enough? They don't find anything. And the name they give to the nothing that they cannot find is matter. They say matter. So this is something to wake up to. This is something that is serious to understand. Science has never found matter. They've also never found consciousness. Why is that? Why can't they find the one thing that experiences the world and the one thing that the one that is experiencing it is experiencing? They can't find those two things. Could it be because it's not an object and you cannot find it as an object in the world? Could it be that the one thing we're trying to find is not a thing you find in the thing you're looking at? Because it's in the one that is observing it? This is what we're creating. We are simulating and creating reality as it appears, just like you would in a game. Now, that's not to say that we're in some kind of simulation in someone's basement. We have to see it in terms of this. The reality that we experience, the things we create in this relative world with sticks and stones and fires and bones, this is all, everything we create here is like a blueprint. So when we create a game or a computer, it's not like that means we're in a game or a computer. It's that there's just blueprints in reality. Reality creates realities, right? And they all have a source. What is the source, the common thread between all realities? Let's say someone did create a simulation in this world and we entered it. That which is experiencing the simulation would be the same one that's experiencing the simulation of this reality. Let's say in this reality, someone then took DMT, they went into another lifetime, or they died and went into another lifetime. The thing that would still be common throughout all changing experience is the awareness of it. The same awareness is experiencing the entirety of all new modulating and changing experiences. So what we find is that this awareness is that which actually creates, sustains, and experiences all the objects that we're experiencing. And what we find is that we never come into contact with the object. So whenever we want to see, can I explore the essence of this object, which we can try right now. Let's just say that we took the exploration of a fire and we wanted to touch the flame. In order, the experiment goes as follows. This is how we have to do this with a completely open mind. I'm not here to debate reality with anyone. I'm here to share a perspective, right? So don't debate me in the comments about this. I care little for that. I'm sharing my point of view of the world. You take it or you leave it. So when we explore the existence of a fire, we want to see, does the fire fundamentally exist in its own right? We would look at the flame and we'd say, well, yes, I can see that it has a color, a size, a shape. I can feel it. It's hot. And we would list these qualities that make the fire, give the fire its existence. For example, imagine a fire that wasn't hot, didn't have a color, didn't have a size, didn't have a shape. Well, that's not a fire. So it's not a fire, right? The thing that makes it a fire is the heat, the color, the size, the shape, the form. Without those things, there's no fire. So there'd be nothing to explore. So when we look at the fire, we say it's hot, it has color, and all these qualities. What we're doing is we're seeing which qualities exist in the fire, fundamentally, and which ones are created by my mind. Because we have to agree, if our mind is experiencing a reality, there must be some portion of that experience influenced by our mind. It's impossible for it not to, and we've all experienced this in our lives. So we're saying which ones are created by our mind, which ones come from the object. When we explore the object, the first thing we have to identify is what are the variables that we're playing with here. So we say, let's just start with the color. Is the color fundamental to the object, or does it depend on something else to exist? The existence of the color is solely dependent upon the temperature of the flame, because if we were to take the temperature of the flame away, for example, the flame is not hot, it's very cold, there is no flame. Flame is dependent on heat, otherwise there is no color. Imagine a flame that is 0 degrees. Well, there's no flame because the flame depends on the heat, right? So you take away the heat, there's no color. So the color depends on the heat. No heat, no color, right? Oh, hot, very hot, and it changes color. So when we look at the thing that changes the color, we say, okay, let's go to the heat. The heat is fundamental. Without a color, that means that the size, shape, and form also depend on the heat. So you have the size, the shape, and the form depending on the heat, because if it's not hot, there's no color, no size, shape, or form. So then you see, okay, so all these qualities depend on the temperature of the flame. So what we're looking at now is something hot, right? So the flame doesn't have a size, doesn't have a shape, doesn't have a form because it's dependent on the heat. When we touch the flame, what do we feel? How do we know there is a sensation? Oh, sorry, how do we know there is a temperature? Because we feel it. we feel the temperature. If we go hot, if we go close, it gets hot and it burns. If we go far away, no burn. So what we find is that the only thing we know of the flame at this stage that is independent of seemingly our mind is the temperature of it. When we touch it, it gets hot. But hot is a sensation and pain is a sensation. Pain is something that you cannot get in the flame. You cannot get pain from a flame. Flames don't have pain inside them. But the only thing we know of a flame is its sensation, and the only thing we know of pain is a sensation. Pain is a strong degree of sensation. So what happens then if you touch the flame? It hurts. Pain is a sensation created by our mind. It's not something that exists in the flame. So flames do not have sensation. Flames do not have color. Flames do not have pain. So what about the flame is left when the only thing that we can experience is a thing that is created by our mind? If we take those things of the flame, what is making the flame a flame? Because the sensation of the flame doesn't come from the flame, it comes from us. We feel and interpret the temperature of the flame based on the sensation of it. So flames don't have temperature, minds have a gauge of temperature created by ourselves. So if we took those fundamentals away, what would we find? There'd be no flame left. What would be left? There's just a floating nothingness. That's called nothing. You see? So we find this happens with every single object that we explore. We could explore it with an apple, a cup, a table, a chair, a tree, a pin. These are all things that we can explore vigorously, and we find they don't have something in them. It's created by our perception. Our perception creates reality. So nothing fundamentally exists. Everything is an emanation and an animated expression and a creation of our own mind. And our mind is a creation that we call consciousness. So consciousness is like the mind is what we call thought and perception. Thought and perception, when it vibrates, in fact, thought and perception don't vibrate, they are vibration. And that vibration is a vibration of consciousness, the one that is observing it. We never find a subject, a form of perception and an object. If we're exploring the flame, the only thing there is the perception of it. And the perception of it is the seeing. And the seeing is not separate from the observation. And that which is observing is also not separate from the observation of it. So we think that there's this three-way street. It's I perceive an object. But really, there's no I perceiving an object. There's just the experience that is holonymous. The observer, the observing, and the thing we observe is inherently one. And we're creating this out of pure potentiality, instantaneous creation. The sound of the kid crying then, instantaneous perception, all simulated by the same reality, the same core reality. And this is why science can never find out what this is. This is why science can never understand it, because the premise in which science explores reality is wrong. They're looking for something, they're looking for proof that everybody else can see in the world. They need to change that. We need to find evidence or proof of something everyone can experience within themselves. But the thing is that the way and the idea that we have of truth is that it has to be physical and fundamentally observed by everyone. It can be observed by everyone, but it has to be observed from within. You cannot observe it from without. So unless this paradigm is changed from seeing things and finding the evidence of things in the world, we must do the same thing, but find that evidence within ourselves. The thing is when you find out within yourself, you can't prove that to anybody else. You can only share a perspective like I'm sharing with you right now and see if other people see it too. I have a community. It is free if you'd like to join. I'm also hosting a retreat at the end of the year. We're going to go deep into these topics and understanding purely for the fun of it. We're not doing this to end our suffering. We're doing it because we enjoy it. We do it because we love it. This retreat is going to go deep into that aspect of the path. So if you'd like to join, the link is in the description. I'd love to see you there. Have an amazing day, guys. Take care.